The ranch had been quiet for too long, not the peaceful quiet of a sleeping world under a blanket of stars, but the heavy, suffocating quiet of absence. Jasper Vance knew that quiet intimately. It had settled into the clapboard walls of the house like dust, thick and permanent, ever since the fever had taken them, his wife and his boy, years ago now, in the summer of 1880. He lived by routine, a shield against the silence. Wake before dawn, coffee black as sin, chores that demanded mindless repetition, milking the few cows, feeding the scrawny chickens, mending fence lines that the wind always seemed intent on tearing down. The work was a penance, a way to fill the hours until exhaustion claimed him, and sleep offered a temporary reprieve from memory. He rarely went into the town of Havenwood, 20 miles away, and when he did, his interactions were curt, transactional. He bought supplies, sold what little he produced, and fled the small, judging eyes of folks who remembered him differently. Remembered him as a man with a laugh, a man with a future cradled in his arms. Now, in the early spring of 1883, the future felt as barren as the wind-scoured plains that stretched out from his doorstep. He was in debt, the ranch barely yielding enough to keep the bank quiet, and the loneliness was a physical ache in his chest that no amount of hard work could entirely numb. He was 35 years old, felt 100, and saw nothing ahead but more of the same, until the land finally swallowed him whole. That changed the day he rode into Havenwood for feed. It wasn't the usual quick stop. A crowd was gathered near the general store, whispers and somber faces. Sheriff Brody stood on a makeshift platform, looking uncomfortable in his starched collar. Jasper kept to the edge, ready to make his purchase and leave, when he heard the words that snagged his attention like barbed wire: widow, destitute, 5 boys. No means. Then he heard the offer. An auction of sorts, but not for belongings. For labor. A family, orphaned save for their mother, left with nothing but the clothes on their backs and a pile of debts. The county couldn't support them indefinitely. A grim solution was being presented: indenture. Whoever would take them on, feed and house them, perhaps pay off their small, ruinous debts, would essentially gain their labor for a set period. It was a practice fading in some places, but on the raw frontier, necessity often carved cruel paths. Jasper felt a cold knot tighten in his gut. He had nothing to offer, least of all shelter for 6 souls. His house was a tomb, his life was empty. Yet something held him there. Curiosity, perhaps, or that strange, dark pull of shared desolation. He saw her then, standing to the side, her face pale and drawn, framed by a plain bonnet. Her name, Sheriff Brody announced, was Martha Callahan. Beside her, huddled together like a small, frightened flock, were her sons. 5 of them, ranging from what looked like barely 4 years old, up to perhaps 12 or 13. Their clothes were patched and worn, their faces thin and shadowed with fear. The sight of the youngest boy, clutching his mother's skirt with wide, tear-filled eyes, sent a jolt through Jasper, sharp and unwelcome. It was the same fierce, possessive grip his own son used to have when he was scared. Bids were slow, hesitant. People needed help, sure, but 6 mouths, 5 growing boys and a woman, the cost of keeping them likely outweighed the value of their labor. The amounts offered were pitiful, barely enough to cover the widow's late husband's medical bills, let alone sustain them. The shame on Martha Callahan's face was a physical thing, a visible burden she bore for her children. Then Sheriff Brody said something that made the crowd murmur. There was a claim on the husband's property, a small, rocky parcel of land they had worked, but it was tied up in a complex dispute with distant relatives. Relatives who, rumor had it, were not kind people and seemed more interested in the land, or perhaps something hidden on it, than the welfare of the family. This added a layer of complication, a potential for future trouble that made the townsfolk even more reluctant. Jasper watched, a strange emptiness widening in his chest. He wasn't bidding, he couldn't, it was madness. But the image of the small boy's face stayed with him, superimposed over a ghost he tried daily to forget. The air grew thick with unspoken judgment and pity. No one else seemed willing to offer a meaningful sum, or perhaps any sum at all, now that the complication was revealed. The auction seemed destined to fail, leaving Martha and her boys in the grim care of a county poorhouse. An impulse, born perhaps of that deep, buried place where empathy still flickered, or maybe just the sheer, defiant perversity of his own isolation, seized him. A voice, low and gravelly from disuse, cut through the hushed crowd. $1, Jasper Vance said, stepping forward slightly. He felt every eye turn to him. Shock, disbelief, then quickly, pity and scorn. Jasper Vance, the hermit of the West Ridge, barely keeping his own head above water, bidding on a family. And for a single $1, it was a gesture, insulting in its meager amount, yet somehow, undeniably, the only offer left on the table that wasn't nothing. Sheriff Brody looked at him, surprise plain on his face. He glanced at Martha Callahan, who looked equally stunned, a flicker of something unreadable in her tired eyes. $1 bought nothing. It paid nothing. It was a symbol of their utter destitution, yes, but also, perhaps, unexpectedly, a lifeline offered by a drowning man. Mr. Vance, the sheriff said, hesitation in his voice. You understand the terms? You would be responsible for their keep, and theirs, the matter of the relatives. I understand, Jasper said, his voice flat. He didn't understand the relatives, not truly, but he understood need. He understood isolation. And in that moment, looking at the 5 small faces watching him with cautious hope, he understood something else too. He understood that he had just done something profoundly, possibly ruinously, stupid. Martha Callahan, her eyes meeting his across the small space, gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't acceptance, not yet. It was resignation, perhaps, or just the desperate grasp of any hand offered in the dark. The hammer fell, $1. It felt cheap, sordid. It felt like a surrender on both their parts. Jasper felt a wave of nausea. What in God's name had he done? He had bought a family. For $1, and he hadn't the faintest idea what to do with them, or they, him. The ride back to the ranch was silent and tense. Jasper rode ahead, feeling them behind him like a physical weight. Martha rode in the back of the wagon he used to transport feed, her sons crammed around her, their small faces turned back towards the receding town, then towards the vast empty plains stretching before them. Jasper didn't look back. He couldn't. He focused on the road ahead, the familiar ruts and stones, trying to outrun the sudden, terrifying reality he had brought upon himself. His quiet ranch was about to be invaded by life, by noise, by needs he had long buried. He felt like a man standing on the edge of a cliff, pushed by an unseen force. He pulled the wagon up to the small, weather-beaten house. It looked even more desolate through their eyes, he imagined. The windows were dark, the porch sagged, the paint peeled like sunburnt skin. It was a picture of neglect, a mirror of his own soul. He swung down from his horse, his movements stiff. Martha climbed out of the wagon slowly, helping the smaller boys down. They lined up beside her, looking at the house, at him, with wide, uncertain eyes. The air was thick with unspoken questions, with apprehension. "This is it," Jasper said, his voice rougher than he intended. "It ain't much." Martha nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Vance," she said softly. Her voice was quiet, steady, but laced with exhaustion. "The shed out back," Jasper gestured vaguely. "It's got a stove, cleaner than the house. You can settle in there for now. I'll get some blankets." He couldn't bring them into the house, not yet. The house was sacred space, haunted space. He couldn't bear the thought of their noise, their presence, disrupting the ghosts that resided there. He walked towards the house, needing the distance, needing to breathe air that wasn't suddenly crowded with the scent of strangers and the faint, sweet smell of little boys. He went inside, the door closing with a soft thud that amplified the silence he had so recently shattered. He stood in the dim, dust-filled main room, the ghosts of laughter and movement swirling around him. He had traded silence for debt, solitude for responsibility, and for a single, meaningless $1. The next few days were a blur of awkward necessity. Jasper brought blankets, some extra provisions from the house, flour, beans, coffee. Martha, quiet and efficient despite her weariness, organized the small shed. It was cramped, drafty, but it had a working stove and kept them out of the elements. The boys watched Jasper with varying degrees of fear and curiosity. The oldest, Caleb, who looked around 13, was guarded, his eyes assessing. The next, Owen, perhaps 10, seemed wary but observant. Henry and Arthur, around 7 and 6, were quieter, sticking close to their mother. Ezra, the youngest, barely 4, clung to Martha's leg, peeking out at the tall, stern man with wide, dark eyes. Jasper set them to work almost immediately. Caleb and Owen helped him with chores they could manage, hauling wood, carrying water from the well. They were thin but willing, following his curt instructions without complaint. Martha cleaned the shed meticulously, then, without being asked, started tackling the small, neglected laundry pile Jasper had accumulated. She washed clothes in a basin, scrubbing them with a determination that spoke of a fierce pride she refused to relinquish. There was little talk. Jasper gave orders, Martha answered questions or gave updates on the boys. Meals were taken separately. Jasper ate his solitary, silent meals in the house, while Martha and the boys ate in the shed. It was a physical manifestation of the distance between them, a distance Jasper both craved and, in some hidden corner of his heart, began to resent. He watched them from afar. Martha, her back straight as she worked, her movements weary but steady. The boys, attempting tasks with clumsy earnestness or huddling together talking in low voices. Their presence was a constant, low hum against the silence he was used to. It was irritating, disruptive, and undeniably, slowly, eroding the edges of his solitude. One evening, as he finished milking the cows, young Ezra wandered out of the shed, drawn by the lowing sounds. He stood a little distance away, watching Jasper with a mixture of fascination and apprehension. Jasper ignored him, finishing his task with practiced efficiency. When he stood, carrying the pail, Ezra didn't flinch away, he just watched. "They're warm," Ezra piped up, his voice small but clear in the evening air. Jasper paused. "Aye, they are. Mama says you're kind." Jasper snorted, a humorless sound. Kind. He was a man who'd bought a family for $1 because he was too broken to say no, too numb to care. "Your mama is mistaken." Ezra tilted his head, considering this. "But you gave us blankets and food. That was part of the bargain." "Oh." Ezra seemed to accept this logic, then his attention drifted back to the cow. "Can I touch?" Jasper hesitated. He hadn't touched a child, really touched one, in years. The thought made his chest tighten. "No," he said quickly. "She's skittish with strangers." Ezra looked disappointed but didn't argue. He just stood there, a small, quiet presence in the vast landscape. Jasper found himself unable to just walk away. He stayed, awkwardly, until Martha appeared at the shed door, calling Ezra back in. The boy waved a small hand at him before disappearing into the dim light of the shed. Jasper found himself looking at the empty space where Ezra had stood for a long moment after. Slowly, subtly, the dynamics began to shift. Jasper saw that Caleb was surprisingly strong for his age, and quick to learn. Owen had a quiet intelligence and a knack for fixing things. Henry and Arthur, though younger, were diligent with simple tasks like gathering eggs. Martha was tireless. She not only kept the shed clean and cooked their meager meals, but she also began to organize the chaotic pantry in the house, her presence creeping into spaces Jasper had kept locked away. Both literally and figuratively. He found himself noticing small things, the way she mended a torn shirt with neat, strong stitches, the way she spoke softly to the boys even when they were difficult, the quiet dignity she maintained despite their circumstances. Meals moved from separate affairs to a shared, albeit silent, table in the main room of the house. It happened gradually. First, Jasper suggested they eat together to save on lamp oil. Then, it just became the norm. Eating together forced a kind of proximity, a shared experience that chipping away at the walls. The boys, once silent, began to chatter among themselves, their voices a foreign, vibrant sound in the previously still air. Jasper mostly ignored them, focusing on his food, but he heard their talk of their old home, their friends, their father. He heard the occasional question directed at him, tentative at first, then bolder. "Mr. Vance, why are the mountains blue like that?" Arthur asked one evening, looking out the window at dusk. Jasper paused, a forkful of beans halfway to his mouth. He hadn't looked at the mountains that way in years, not with genuine curiosity. He usually only saw them as a barrier, a distant wall. "Dust in the air," he grunted, "catches the light." Arthur considered this, then nodded as if it made perfect sense. Jasper found himself watching the boy for a moment longer than necessary. One afternoon, a wild storm blew in without warning, the sky turning an angry bruise of purple and gray. The wind howled like a banshee, shaking the foundations of the house. Rain lashed against the windows, and the temperature plummeted. It was a brutal, fast-moving storm, typical of the unpredictable prairie weather. Jasper rushed to secure the livestock, his heart pounding against the wind's roar. He saw Martha and the boys scrambling to tie down anything loose outside the shed. He knew the shed wasn't built to withstand a storm like this. He ran back to the house, pushing against the gale. He opened the door and yelled over the wind, "Get inside, all of you, now!" Martha didn't hesitate. She gathered the smaller boys, herding them towards the house. Caleb and Owen grabbed armsful of wood and ran ahead. They all burst through the door, breathless and soaked, into the relative safety of the main room. The sudden influx of bodies, the noise of the storm, the frantic energy of the boys, it was overwhelming. Jasper stood there for a moment, catching his breath, watching them huddle together near the fireplace. For the first time, the house felt inhabited. Full. Not with ghosts, but with living, breathing people. Martha wrung water from her skirt. "Thank you, Mr. Vance," she said, her voice tight with relief. The shed, it would not have held. "It wouldn't," he agreed, looking at the ferocity of the storm outside. They spent the night in the main room. Jasper built up the fire. The boys, after the initial fear subsided, began to whisper and play quiet games. Martha sat by the fire, her eyes watchful, occasionally smoothing a damp lock of hair from Ezra's forehead as he slept curled against her side. Jasper sat in his usual chair, watching the fire, listening to the wind, and, against his will, listening to the soft sounds of the family gathered in his space. The silence was broken, replaced by something else entirely, something warm and undeniably human. In the quiet lulls between the wind's shrieks, Martha spoke, not to him directly, but recounting stories to her sons, stories of their father, of their life before. Stories of hardship, but also of love and laughter. Jasper listened, piecing together glimpses of the man they had lost, the life they had left behind. He learned that their father had been a good man, a dreamer, but perhaps not the most practical. He had invested in mining claims that never panned out, borrowed money on expectations that were never met. He had loved his family fiercely, Martha made clear, but his lack of caution had left them vulnerable. He learned about the relatives mentioned in town, distant cousins of her husband who had appeared after his death, showing an unusual interest in the small, worthless-seeming patch of land the family owned. They were sharp, unpleasant men, Martha said, lawyers from back east, and they had made veiled threats when she refused to sell the land for a pittance. They had hounded her, claiming debts and legal rights that she couldn't understand or fight against. They had made her life a misery, ultimately forcing her to flee, leaving everything behind. Jasper sat in the shadows, listening, the pieces clicking into place. The complication Sheriff Brody had mentioned. The reason no one in town wanted to take them on. It wasn't just debt, it was potential trouble, trouble that followed the family like a shadow. And he, Jasper Vance, the man who sought only solitude, had just willingly stepped into that shadow. A few days after the storm, as the land began to dry and the sun returned, Jasper was working near the edge of his property when he saw them. 3 riders, well-dressed for the frontier, hard-eyed and purposeful, riding slowly along his fence line, scanning the property. They didn't look like ranch hands or prospectors. They looked like trouble. He straightened up, his hand going instinctively to the rifle he always kept slung across his saddle nearby. He knew, with a chilling certainty, who they were. The relatives. The trouble Martha had spoken of, they had found her. He rode back to the house quickly. Martha was outside, hanging laundry with the help of Henry and Arthur. Caleb and Owen were chopping wood near the shed. Ezra was playing in the dirt nearby. "Get everyone inside," Jasper said, his voice low and urgent. "Now, don't ask questions, just do it." Martha saw the look on his face, the tension in his shoulders. She didn't hesitate. She rounded up the younger boys, herding them towards the house. Caleb and Owen looked up, sensing the shift in the air, and followed quickly. They gathered in the main room, the usual quiet replaced by a nervous energy. "Who is it?" Martha asked, her eyes wide with apprehension. "The folks you mentioned," Jasper said grimly. "They found you." Fear bloomed on Martha's face, but she quickly composed herself. She drew her sons close. What do they want? You know what they want, Jasper said. The land, or whatever they think is on it, and they'll use you and the boys to get it. Caleb, standing straighter now, looked from his mother to Jasper. Are they bad men? He asked, his voice small but firm. They are, Jasper confirmed, meeting the boy's gaze, and they mean you harm. Martha's face was set in grim determination. We have nothing to give them, she said. The land is worthless rock and sagebrush. There's nothing there. They don't believe that, Jasper said. People don't travel this far and make threats over nothing. There's something they think is there. He looked at Martha, his gaze searching. Do you know what it could be? Anything your husband ever mentioned? Martha racked her brain, her brow furrowed. He talked about gold sometimes, wild dreams, but there was never anything, only debt. She paused, then her eyes widened slightly. He did have a journal. He kept notes on everything. The land, his ideas, even little drawings. They searched everywhere for it after he passed. They seemed very keen on finding it. But I packed it away with our things. It must be in the trunk. Jasper's eyes narrowed. A journal, notes on the land, maybe that was it. Not gold itself, but information. A survey, a hidden marker, something that held value to these men. They heard the sound of horses approaching the house. They're here, Jasper said. He grabbed his rifle. Stay here, don't make a sound, lock the door after I go out. Martha's hand went to his arm, her touch light but firm. Be careful, Mr. Vance. He looked at her face, etched with fear but also a deep, protective love for her sons. For $1, he had taken on a responsibility he hadn't expected, hadn't wanted. Now that responsibility had a name, and it was knocking at his door, likely with ill intent. He nodded, a silent promise passing between them. He stepped outside and closed the door behind him, hearing the lock click into place. He walked to the edge of the porch, the rifle held loosely in his hands. The three riders reined in their horses a stone's throw away. They were indeed well dressed, their faces pale and hard, looking utterly out of place in the rugged landscape. Vance, the man in the middle said, his voice smooth and carrying an eastern drawl that grated on Jasper's ears. We understand you've taken in the Callahan widow and her brood. They're living here, Jasper confirmed, his voice flat and uninviting. We have business with them, another man said, shifting in his saddle. They owe us, and they possess property that is rightfully ours. They're under my roof, Jasper said, tightening his grip on the rifle. It wasn't just a roof now. It was a home, suddenly fiercely worth defending. Any business you have with them, you have with me. The three men exchanged amused glances. The leader chuckled, a dry, unpleasant sound. You think you can stand against us, Vance? We represent powerful interests. I represent the people in my house, Jasper said, his gaze steady. The wind picked up, swirling dust around their boots. The quiet ranch felt suddenly like a battlefield. We are here for the widow's husband's journal, the third man said, cutting to the chase. Hand it over, and hand the family over. We can make this worth your while. He pulled a leather pouch from his saddlebag, jingling with coins. Jasper's eyes flickered to the pouch, then back to the men's faces. He thought of Ezra's small hand waving goodbye, of Martha's quiet strength, of Caleb's watchful eyes. He thought of the silence he had lived in for so long, and the sudden unexpected warmth that had filled it. They're not going anywhere, Jasper said, his voice hardening, and neither is anything they brought with them. The leader's smile vanished. You're making a mistake, Vance, a grave one. Maybe, Jasper said, wouldn't be the first. He raised the rifle slightly, not aiming, but making his intentions clear. Now, you can ride on out, or you can try to take them, your choice. The tension stretched, thick and heavy. The men looked at him, then at the sturdy, silent house, then back at him. They clearly hadn't expected resistance, especially not from a man known for keeping to himself. They were lawyers, not gunslingers, though Jasper suspected they might have hired hands elsewhere. Here, though, it was just the four of them. We'll be back, Vance, the leader said, his voice promising retribution, with men who understand your kind of stubbornness. I'll be here, Jasper replied. He stood his ground, watching them wheel their horses around and ride back the way they came, disappearing over a low ridge. He didn't relax until they were completely out of sight. He lowered the rifle, his hands trembling slightly. He hadn't had to fire, but the threat was real. It wasn't over. He went back inside. Martha was standing by the door, her face pale. The boys were huddled behind her, their eyes wide. "They'll be back," Jasper said, stating the obvious. "I know," Martha whispered. "They always come back." "We need to be ready," Jasper said. He looked at Martha. "The journal. Where is it?" She led him to a large, heavy trunk she had managed to bring with them. Buried beneath clothes and other meager possessions, she found it, a thick, leather-bound book, worn with age. She handed it to him. Jasper opened it carefully. It wasn't just notes and drawings. It was a detailed, meticulous survey of the land parcel her husband had owned, filled with coordinates, geological observations, and intricate sketches of rock formations. And tucked inside the back cover, held by a brittle ribbon, was a map. A hidden map, marked with symbols and lines that Jasper, a man who knew this land, could only partly decipher. It wasn't a map to gold. It was a map to something else, something specific, hidden deep within the rocks Martha had called worthless. He looked at Martha, then at the boys. This wasn't just about debt or pride. It was about something valuable, something hidden. Her husband had found something, or thought he had, and these men knew it. And they believed the journal held the key. "What is it?" Martha asked, seeing the look on his face. Jasper hesitated, then decided honesty was their only chance. "I don't know exactly," he admitted. "But it's not just land they're after. There's something on that property, something valuable, and your husband, he found it, or the way to it." He showed her the map, the strange symbols. "This journal, this map, this is the secret." Understanding dawned on Martha's face, followed by a fresh wave of fear. "All this time, all this trouble, for this?" "Aye," Jasper said. He looked at the map again. It referenced landmarks he knew, formations near the rocky parcel. If they were coming back, they would go there first, but if they didn't find what they wanted, they would come back here, for the journal, for the family who possessed it. "We can't fight them," Martha said, her voice trembling slightly. "We have to," Jasper said. He looked at the boys, at Caleb, standing protectively in front of his younger brothers. "They won't stop." Over the next few days, the ranch was a beehive of tense activity. Jasper worked with a newfound urgency. He fortified the house as best he could, checked his limited supply of ammunition. He taught Caleb how to load and aim the rifle, simple drills, just in case. He showed Owen how to bar the doors securely. Martha, meanwhile, did her part, ensuring they had enough water and food stored inside, quietly preparing for a siege. The initial awkwardness was gone, replaced by a shared purpose, a silent understanding. They were in this together, the man who had bought them for $1 and the family who had nowhere else to go. The dollar felt like a lifetime ago. What held them together now was something far more costly, far more valuable. One evening, as dusk settled, casting long shadows across the land, Jasper sat with Martha on the porch. The boys were inside, asleep or whispering quietly. The air was cool and still. "Why did you do it, Mr. Vance?" Martha asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Back in Havenwood, why did you offer that $1?" Jasper looked out at the darkening horizon. The mountains were indeed a deep, bruised blue. He thought about the long, silent years, the emptiness that had become his only companion. He thought about the sight of Ezra's face, the echo of a ghost. "I don't rightly know," he admitted truthfully. "Felt like a fool's errand. Maybe I was tired of the quiet." He paused. "Or maybe I just couldn't stand to see that boy's face." He didn't elaborate, didn't speak of his own son, the wound that never truly healed. But Martha understood. The unspoken grief that surrounded him, the reason for his solitude, was as palpable as the land itself. Martha was silent for a long moment. "Thank you," she said finally, her voice thick with emotion. "For everything." "It ain't over yet," Jasper warned. "I know," she said. "But whatever happens, thank you for giving us this time, this place." She gestured vaguely, encompassing the small, struggling ranch, the sturdy house, the quiet night. It was a place of refuge, bought at an impossible price, now defended with a willingness that had grown unexpectedly from barren ground. They didn't return for nearly a week. Jasper and Martha were constantly vigilant, scanning the horizon. The waiting was the hardest part. the tension a tight knot in their stomachs. The boys were subdued, sensing the danger, but they also watched Jasper and Martha, taking courage from their calm resolve. Then, one afternoon, a larger group of riders appeared on the horizon. Not 3 this time, but 6 or 7. They were not well-dressed lawyers. They looked like the hired muscle, the kind of men who did dirty work without asking questions. "They're here," Jasper said, his voice low. He was already moving, heading for his rifle. Martha gathered her sons, her movements swift and calm. "Inside, quickly. Stay away from the windows." Jasper took a position near the front window, rifle in hand, obscured by the heavy curtains. Caleb stood beside him, holding a smaller shotgun Jasper had given him, his face pale but determined. Owen was posted at the back, ready to sound the alarm if anyone tried to flank the house. Henry and Arthur were tasked with keeping Ezra quiet and safe in the root cellar. The riders approached, slowing as they neared the house. They spread out, surrounding the place. The leader, a burly man with a scarred face, dismounted and walked towards the porch. "Vance," he bellowed, "we know you've got the Callahan woman and the journal. Hand them over, and no one gets hurt." Jasper didn't reply. He waited, his heart pounding, the silence inside the house deafening save for the faint, muffled sounds from the root cellar. The man on the porch grew impatient. He kicked the bottom step. "We know you're in there. Don't be a fool, Vance. This is between us and the woman. You don't want part of this." Still, Jasper remained silent. He knew what they wanted. They wanted the journal, the key to the land, and they likely wanted to eliminate the family who had a claim to it. They wouldn't stop until they got what they came for. Suddenly, the scarred man pulled a torch from his saddle. "Last chance, Vance. Send them out, or we burn you out." He took a step towards the porch. Jasper knew he couldn't wait any longer. He pushed the curtains aside and stepped into view on the porch, rifle raised. "Get off my land," he said, his voice clear and steady, carrying across the yard. The scarred man grinned, a cruel flash of teeth. "So be it." He raised the torch. Jasper fired. Not at the man, but at the ground directly in front of him, sending up a spray of dust and rock. It was a warning shot, meant to show he was armed and willing to use it. The man flinched back, startled, but didn't drop the torch. The other riders raised their own rifles. "Charge the house," the scarred man yelled. 3 riders spurred their horses forward. As they galloped across the yard, Jasper fired again, this time aiming at the legs of the lead horse. The animal screamed and went down, throwing its rider. The other 2 riders pulled up short, hesitant. From the window, Caleb fired the shotgun. He wasn't aiming for the men, but at the sky, the loud blast adding to the chaos and showing there was more than one gun in the house. Confusion rippled through the attackers. They had expected a lone, easily intimidated rancher. Instead, they faced resistance. The scarred man, his face now contorted with rage, yelled orders, directing his men to dismount and approach on foot, using the sparse cover of the land. The standoff became a tense, dangerous game of cat and mouse. The attackers moved closer, trying to find angles to shoot at the house without exposing themselves too much. Jasper, with Caleb reloading beside him, fired carefully, strategically, forcing them to keep their distance, making them hesitant to rush the building. Inside, Martha was a pillar of calm strength. She kept the younger boys quiet, peering out through small gaps in the curtains, relaying information to Jasper about the attackers' movements. Owen watched the back, ensuring no one crept around unseen. The sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long, eerie shadows. The fight had been going on for what felt like hours. Ammunition was running low. The attackers were growing bolder, frustrated by the stalemate. Suddenly, the scarred man and 2 others made a dash for the house, attempting to reach the porch. "Now, Caleb," Jasper yelled. He fired, forcing one man to dive for cover. Caleb, trembling but resolute, aimed the shotgun and fired at the second man's feet, making him stumble. The scarred man, however, reached the porch steps. As the man raised his torch towards the wooden structure, Jasper lunged forward, dropping his rifle, tackling the man off the porch into the dust. They hit the ground hard, grappling. The man was bigger, stronger, fueled by rage, but Jasper fought with a desperate ferocity, fueled by the lives he was protecting. He felt a sharp pain in his side as the man's fist connected, but Jasper held on, twisting, driving his knee into the man's gut. The man gasped, momentarily losing his grip. Jasper seized the opportunity, slamming the man's head against a rock hidden in the dirt. The man went limp. Jasper scrambled away, breathless, his side throbbing. He looked up. The remaining attackers, seeing their leader fall, hesitated. Then, one of them yelled something, and they began to retreat, mounting their horses and riding off into the deepening twilight, dragging the stunned, injured, scarred man between two horses. Silence returned to the ranch, but it was a different kind of silence this time. It was the silence of exhaustion, of adrenaline wearing off, of victory hard won. Jasper pushed himself to his feet, wincing at the pain in his side. Martha was instantly there, opening the door, her face a mask of worry and relief. "Jasper," she cried, using his given name for the first time. She rushed to his side. "I'm all right," he rasped, leaning against the porch post. Caleb ran out, shotgun still in hand, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. Owen followed, the younger boys peeking cautiously from the doorway. Martha helped him inside, her hands gentle as she checked his side. It was bruised, but nothing seemed broken. The younger boys rushed forward, clinging to him, their fear turning to shaky relief. Ezra, no longer afraid, hugged his leg fiercely. In the aftermath, the air in the house was thick with emotion. The shared danger had stripped away the last vestiges of their initial caution and mistrust. They had faced death together, and they had survived. That night, they ate dinner together, not in silence, but with hushed conversation about what had happened, the fear they had felt, the relief of the attackers leaving. Jasper, sore and exhausted, felt a profound sense of peace settle over him that he hadn't experienced in years. The ghosts in the house seemed less potent now, overshadowed by the vibrant presence of living souls. The secret of the journal remained, but the immediate threat had been neutralized. Jasper examined the map again. He didn't know what it led to, but he knew it was something those men desperately wanted. Perhaps, he thought, it could be their leverage, a way to finally be free of these pursuing shadows. But that was a problem for another day. Tonight, they were safe, together. Weeks turned into months. The spring thawed into a golden summer. Life on the ranch settled into a new rhythm. It was still hard work, but it was shared work. Caleb and Owen became invaluable helpers, learning ranching tasks quickly under Jasper's guidance. Henry and Arthur helped Martha with gardening and chores, their laughter echoing across the yard. Ezra followed Jasper everywhere, his small shadow, asking endless questions that Jasper found himself answering with a patience he hadn't known he possessed. The house was no longer silent. It was filled with the sounds of a family, footsteps, voices, laughter, the occasional squabble quickly mediated by Martha. Martha brought warmth and order to the neglected house. She cooked, she cleaned, she mended not just clothes, but the ragged edges of Jasper's life. She talked to him, not just about ranch business, but about her day, her thoughts, her quiet hopes for her son's future. And Jasper, in turn, found himself talking back, sharing thoughts he hadn't voiced in years, slowly, tentatively, opening the door to the buried parts of himself. Their relationship had shifted from a transactional arrangement born of desperation to something quiet, deep, and rooted in mutual respect and shared experience. The dollar had been forgotten, an absurd footnote to their reality. They were a family, bound not by blood or law, but by shared hardship, resilience, and the unexpected kindness that had blossomed in the desolate quiet of the ranch. One evening, sitting on the porch as the sun painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, Martha spoke the words that sealed their new reality. "We could try to find what the map leads to," she said, looking at him. "Maybe it's worth enough to start somewhere new, somewhere they can't find us." Jasper considered this, a new start, away from the potential return of the attackers, away from the ghosts of his past. He looked at the house, no longer just a shell, but a home filled with the energy of the family he had grown to care for. He looked at Martha, her face soft in the fading light, her eyes holding a quiet strength he admired. "Or," Jasper said slowly, "we could stay here." Martha's breath hitched slightly. "Here?" "Aye," he said, "this is home now, isn't it, for all of us?" He paused, then reached out and covered her hand where it rested on the porch railing. His touch was hesitant, rough, but filled with a tenderness that surprised them both. "We faced them here, we stood our ground, this is our ground now." He looked at her, really looked at her. The grief in his eyes was still there, a part of him, but it was no longer the only thing. There was hope now, and connection, and a quiet affection that had grown like wildflowers in the harsh prairie soil. "We could face whatever comes next," he said softly, "together." Martha looked at him, her eyes searching his. She saw the man who had been lost in his own pain, but who had opened his home, his life, to strangers in need. She saw the protector who had stood against danger for her and her sons. She saw the burgeoning warmth beneath the gruff exterior. A small smile touched her lips, genuine and full of a peace she hadn't felt in years. "Together," she echoed, her voice a promise. The secret of the journal remained, a mystery waiting to be explored. But the real secret, the one that had truly transformed Jasper's life, wasn't buried in the ground. It was the secret that a lonely heart could find family, that a desolate place could become a home, and that sometimes the most valuable things in life weren't bought with money, but forged in shared hardship, unexpected kindness, and the quiet strength of a bond built on trust and resilience. The dollar he had paid in Havenwood was a forgotten echo. The price of this new life had been much higher, and infinitely more rewarding.